not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Hello, and welcome to episode 55 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton, and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swaddling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are you?
I'm okay, Dan. We are slowly seeing that move towards freedom. Back gardens and the weekends weather goes bad, but it's a long weekend at least. But a couple of weeks from now, I believe we can eat outside and have a coffee outside, and maybe even something slightly stronger. How about yourself, Dan? How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Just waiting for the gyms to open in a little over a week. And indeed, yes, looking forward to visiting certain hostelries that have outside space where we can have a few beers. That'll be nice, and hopefully the weather will continue its recent improvement, and that won't be so cold. So it'll be quite good. So, Mike, what have we got to discuss today?
So we're talking about COVID, the lockdown easing, and the dreaded passports. We've of course got the Mayoral and GLA elections coming up in London in May. We'll be talking about them. And Croydon Council has a lot going on. We'll be talking about some of the by-elections that are coming up there and some of the other things that have been going on at the council. And lastly, as it's been a little while since we've done one of these, there's been lots of stuff on our website, and we'll be giving you an update on a few articles you might want to read.
We've now had the anniversary of the 3 weeks to crush the curve, as it were, and to save the NHS. But the vaccine rollout continues at a pace. There've now been over 31 million first doses given out, and apparently now over 4 million of the second doses of the vaccine have been administered. As we know, we are way ahead of the European Union countries, and yet we're only now allowed to have friends round to our gardens. The pubs, as we mentioned in the introduction, will be opening soon, at least for outside eating and drinking, and shops and gyms should be opening. All that should be taking place on the 12th of April. Doesn't look like we're going to be having any overseas travel anytime soon, though, with various threats of very heavy fines if you leave the country, unless you've got a very, very good reason and it's on the list of acceptable excuses. But nonetheless, we seem to be on the way, as you say, Mike, said earlier, Mike, to freedom. However, the COVID legislation has been extended for a further 6 months. So the roadmap has all restrictions being lifted in June. Yet the law which allows restrictions to be in place has been extended for a further 3 months past that date. Mike, the weather's getting a bit nicer. Looks like we're on our way to some sort of freedom, but we're not quite there yet.
No, indeed. The mask slips of government, doesn't it? When they renew the legislation that allows them to take control of your lives way past the point they said they definitely won't be using it. It is what you expect. Government, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and they've had absolute power. I find it very hard, sadly, to believe they will look to give it up, and maybe we're coming to talk about some of the ways they intend to take more of it from us. But we are moving in the right direction. You sense it when you go out. You see more people about. You see the traffic, and I think people will be beyond angry if they dare to roll this back. The other thing is, and you mentioned the vaccine rollout, and I'll be honest, I've had my first jab, and I don't know when the second one is, but no doubt that someone will contact me. Lots and lots of people have had their vaccination, obviously, particularly older people, have tended to have both doses now and have had them a few weeks ago. The risk just isn't there in the way it was. Death rate is now below the 5-year average. So why are we still locked down in this way? And not that lockdown helped save any lives, frankly, as we see the comparisons between lives of the countries that locked down and didn't. I work a lot with people overseas. It's fascinating when you talk with people in other countries. They can't believe we're still in lockdown, because countries that are in far worse state than us aren't. I know continental Europe isn't, is locking down, but most of America, much of the Far East, they've all opened up. And it's slightly ridiculous that we haven't. I don't know, Dan, what do you think? One thing I wanted to ask you about was the overseas travel. My reading of it is that it's really just a tax on travelling overseas rather than an outright ban.
Pretty much, yes. Yes, you can go, but you do have to pay a fine, and also if you come back, you have to stay in a hotel for a couple of weeks. So I understand it. So it's effectively a ban for most people because it's just so prohibitive.
So it's not a ban for the millionaires in the cabinet.
No, exactly. No. If you're a millionaire, if you own a property, I think in fact owning a property overseas is potentially one of the excuses that you can have for going. So yeah, so the wealthier you are, by and large, the easier it is for you to have that overseas travel.
I'll retract that point. You don't have to be a millionaire. You only need to have a couple of hundred spare thousand to buy a property overseas.
Yes, but nonetheless, it's still the wealthier people.
Of course,
was ever thus with any of these things. If you have the money, it's like, oh well, Russian oligarchs. Well, the government always allowed them to come along and buy some property in London if they fancied it, didn't they? So
no, but there is a difference here, and I think it is kind of key. Is you can buy yourself, invest yourself into a country, and that has always been the case, and that's generally under the assumption that you'll bring some wealth in and create jobs at the back of it. This is very much a if you're rich enough to pay the fine, you can have your 2 weeks holiday. If you're not rich enough to pay the fine, you're stuck inside behind the wall, and that does seem just quite frankly outrageous. Of course, if we had I would have thought a left-wing opposition party, a party set up by trade unions for the working class, might have made some bit more noise about that, but I'm not sure one exists anymore in this country.
No, they're clearly not that interested in the working class anymore. They're more preoccupied with woke ideology, as we've all seen over the past year. However, to be fair to Sir Keir Starmer, he's suggested tentatively that he's not so keen on the idea of vaccine passports to be able to go to the pub, for example. He's even described them as un-British.
Completely right. I'm struggling. I'm surprised I'm saying this, and even the Lib Dems have come out against them. Of course, it's an appalling idea. We're not a country where you have to show your papers. And that's not really me saying that. I remember Michael Gove saying that. I'm old enough to remember Boris Johnson saying that. I remember the Conservative Party more generally saying that. But here we are. They seem to be wanting to introduce exactly that kind of law. And it just imagine the situation whereby you're going in. You have to have your passport, your vaccine passport, to go places. What if you haven't been vaccinated yet because you haven't had the chance? What if you haven't because you've got some sort of religious reason behind it? Are we going to ask people of certain religions to show they're excluded from society? I can't think that would be a good idea. What if you've got some medical condition that stops you being vaccinated? Do we trust the bouncer on the bar or the I don't know, the turnstile operator at a football game or whatever it might be? Do we trust them with your private medical data? Do the companies want to take on the liability of trusting those staff with people's private medical data? There's nothing about this. It's morally wrong. But there's nothing about it that sounds practically like it would work to me.
Well, no, I mean, I think they're probably thinking that it's not going to be a case of you actually present papers as such. But although I understand the meaning of that phraseology, I think, it's this obsession with the technology and the obsession with having an app. So obviously they had this test and trace app that's cost so much money and was really, really ineffective. So I'll tell you what, let's make the most of that. Let's do a few tweaks here and there and turn it into an app which says whether you've had the vaccine, and I don't know whether they're going to say you've had to have the 2 vaccines, or apparently you can also record on there. If you're against vaccines or you can't have a vaccine, apparently you can have a recent negative COVID test. And apparently they're going to give you some sort of certification for that. As I say, I think they'll be trying to use the app because Matt Hancock loves a good app. And that's what they want to do. Of course, with the app, rather than a piece of paper, that app will be on your phone. So then it's potentially an issue for people who don't have the
Absolutely.
latest smartphones or don't have smartphones at all. Obviously, some older people may or may not have a phone, but even if they do have a phone, it might be a more basic kind of model. But of course, one of the things about this app is it knows where you are. They want to know where you are. Why? So because that's what the test and trace aspect was. They would tell you whether you'd been within a certain vicinity for a certain period of time of somebody who'd apparently had a positive COVID test. I think it's beyond un-British. I think it's also impractical.
No government, the Stasi didn't operate on the basis of telling the citizens of East Germany that we want to know where you are. We need to control every aspect of your life. We need to take away your freedoms. They told them that it was for the good of the workers. The West were imperialists. This is in their best interest to have their freedoms taken away from them. The Chinese were told that they were building a great China as millions were starving to death. Same in Ukraine, same in Germany. But people were sent to holiday camps. Sorry, but I hate to use that analogy, but wherever you go, governments tell you that something's good for you as they're taking away your freedoms, and this just isn't any different. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. There's telling you, giving you a bit of paper as to what you can and can't do based on a virus that you're vaccinated against, or you've at least had the opportunity to be vaccinated against. You may have chosen not to take it because actually that should be your choice. And frankly, right now, where death rates are below what they normally are, is an appalling suggestion on every level.
Indeed. Well, we'll have to wait and see if these things come in. We may find that some pub chains just refuse to implement it. I know many of them have been quite vocal in their opposition to such things, but we'll have to wait and see. Well, we're almost moving on from COVID, so let's do that let's hope so. Let's do that on the podcast, shall we? Well, we've got the London Mayoral election coming up in amongst all of this. Of course, this is the delayed London Mayoral and GLA elections that were supposed to take place last May, but were delayed for a year because of the COVID crisis, as it were. Sadiq Khan is running again for the Labour Party and is, no pun intended, but the red hot favourite to retain the mayorship. And we've got Sean Bailey for the Tories. Sean Bailey, not too popular, truth be told, with Conservatives. There's been talk of them not giving him as much money in the last few months for his campaign as people might have expected. But there's a heck of a lot of candidates that have now been declared. Now that nominations have closed, most notably, I think, from the perspective that we perhaps take on things, is Lawrence Fox from the Reclaim Party. And what's particularly interesting about that is that there is no candidate from Reform UK. They are standing in the for the Greater London Assembly, though, and we'll go on to that in a little bit. But no Reform UK candidate for mayor. It seems there seems to have been an unofficial pact between the Reclaim Party and Reform UK. So Lawrence Fox is making a lot of TV and media appearances. Obviously, he's focusing mainly on free speech, that side of things, but he is also now talking about the lockdown and removing what restrictions there are. From a similar mindset, perhaps, there's also David Curtin from the Heritage Party, a friend of the podcast, been on the podcast before, and also spoke at a few of our events. So David's there, and also the SDP have put up a mayoral candidate, Steve Kelleher, which is good to see. That they are they're standing for the mayoralty. Mike, what have you made of the list of candidates that have been declared?
It's interesting to see who runs and who's looking to kind of further the name of their party in many ways, and that's part of this. And I was pleased to see the SDP has been able to do that. We've done a few things with the SDP. I think they're an interesting party of the left, but a sensible left, and that's good to see them kind of build up there. I think Count Binface is a really interesting prospect. Looking forward to their campaign literature. And beyond that, there's a lot of names. It is hard to work out what's happening there. I think the really interesting thing, which you've already touched upon, of course, is that Lawrence Fox of the Reclaim Party is running, and the Reform Party is running on the GLA list and GLA constituencies. That makes a lot of sense. I doubt there was too much of a formal pact, but certainly a very informal pact. It seems to be likely there. It makes an awful lot of sense that two parties have got an awful lot in common. And of course, there is a factor here that they're not that dissimilar to David's Heritage Party. I think there will be, I don't know where UKIP are these days, but they will have some similarities with UKIP still. And the fact that they've got a famous name running for mayor in Lawrence Fox, but the actual what might build out to be a real party infrastructure at the GLA level is with the Reform Party. That makes a lot of sense in what they're doing.
Yes, you mentioned Count Binface there. There are other candidates standing, many of them, and they can be found on the London Elects website. But yeah, you have got Peter Gammons for UKIP. There's a interesting name for a UKIP candidate, isn't it? You've obviously got Piers Corbyn, who's standing under the Let London Live name there. So I mean, I probably disagree with him on almost everything, but he's certainly been one of the leading lights in the anti-lockdown campaign. To be fair to him, he has been arrested on numerous occasions. But one name I'd noticed, there was some chap called Richard Hewison, who's standing for a party called the Rejoin EU. So yes, an interesting way to look at things for a mayoral.
Yes, indeed. One wonders if they have more policies than that. They may have got the wrong elections. If that's the case, I think it's particularly interesting to look at the candidate for the Vote Women's Equality Party on Orange. I was tempted, I have to say, to vote Women's Equality Party on Purple. I may at a push have gone for Vote Women's Equality Party on Violet, but Orange is a deal breaker for me. I don't know what your thoughts on the matter are.
I have to draw the line somewhere. Absolutely, but I'm particularly looking forward to no doubt, the Mural debate between Count Binface and Rejoin EU and Piers Corbyn. I suspect somehow we won't have the pleasure of that, but it would have been good to see what Count Binface's policies really are, because I'm interested in Binface and all such things. For people who may not know, the London mayoral election, you get 2 votes, first preference and a second preference, and I think sadly the way the polls are going, the only question is, will Sadiq Khan win on the first preferences, and so will it in fact go to people's second preferences? Sean Bailey probably will come second, even if that's on second preferences. I would imagine, obviously, with no Reform UK candidate, it's Lawrence Fox is going to be the main sort of standard bearer, I suppose, of free speech and anti-lockdown, certainly as far as the media are concerned. I mean, obviously David Curtin's been doing this for many years in the GLA, and indeed for over the past year in particular with lockdown. It is a shame that Lawrence Fox, who has that media profile, or has certainly got that media profile over the past year for this sort of thing. His media profile before that was something completely different, and he's very much gone on to David Curtin's ground. So it is a bit of a shame that people couldn't have worked together, perhaps. But there we are.
Just to people listening to this, it is worth noting that the way that works with the 2 preference votes is, if your first candidate is eliminated, it then goes to your second candidate. What that tends to mean in practical terms is you might want to vote for a smaller party first and a bigger party second. Now, it's up to you. Clearly, it's your vote, and I'm not going to. With lots of people here, we're not in the business of giving recommendations, I don't think. But if you vote for if you vote in that order, a sort of smaller party first, a bigger party second, it's more effective for the smaller candidate and has no real effect on the bigger party candidate. Although, of course, they will want your vote first. But if you wanted to register a protest, that would be the way to do it.
So, moving on from Sadiq Khan, we move to the Greater London Assembly. And firstly, if we look at the list, so this is a top-up list where people are elected on an entire London-wide basis, and it's where smaller parties have a better chance of being elected. So, for example, UKIP had 2 people elected the most recent GLA elections, one of which was David Curtin, and the other one was Peter Whittle, who is now there at the New Culture Forum. So, as we said, Reform UK are putting up a full slate of candidates, whereas Reclaim are not. Heritage Party, though, as we mentioned, David Curtin, they've put up a list of candidates. And not only David Curtin on that, but Sean Finch is second on that list. And the Christian People's Alliance have also got a slate of candidates there. Top of the list is Maureen Martin, who we had on the podcast a while back talking about Christianity in politics. Right, what have you made of the list candidates that have been announced?
It's firstly interesting. We've been coming up for 3 years now. And it's interesting how quite a few of these people we've spoken to. So you mentioned Maureen. She's written for we've had a sort of written interview. We've had her on the podcast talking about Christianity and politics. And she's written an article about lockdown for us. Helen as well, second on the list, Helen Spibley Van. Apologies to Helen for her surname, my pronunciation there. We've interviewed her on our website, who's second on their list. As you've mentioned, the Heritage Party, obviously David and Sean have both spoken at events of ours. They've been on the podcast, they've written for us, so great to see both of them there. And of course, we've now just recently, and we'll come on to talk about that perhaps, published an article from Robert Pole, the Reform UK one of the Reform UK candidates. So that's just, quite interesting, that kind of effect there. Lots of parties on the list. I mean, some interesting ones, and it's quite a sensible way of a party trying to gauge some support, is to put itself on this list. The Communist Party of Britain, always sad to see them there, but they are there, and as is their one. A few parties I confess to not recognising at all, but the Women's Equality Party in Orange again are on there. So other than that, yeah, some usual names from Croydon we've seen on different parties' lists, but including for the Conservatives, one of the councillors from Purley.
Yeah, I mean, most of the smaller parties have got themselves together to be on the list. SDP, UKIP, and the aforementioned Rejoin EU. But one party that is on the GLA list is a Londependence Party, which I found that's most amusing. So I thought better look them up. And wouldn't you know, there's a hashtag, what is it, FBPE, is it? Facebook, what is it, Pro Europe? Is that what it is?
Follow back Pro Europe.
Oh, is that what it is? What would I know? I don't do the Twitter. Their main policy seems to be that London should become independent of the United Kingdom and should rejoin the EU. And they seem to be, from what I can tell on Twitter, they seem to be very supportive of Black Lives Matter and other such wokery. So yeah, I'm not sure they're going to do too well, but nonetheless, it's an interesting idea from that group of individuals.
If they can move the boundary for London about 1 mile north from where I'm sitting, maybe a mile and a bit, I'm not necessarily against the idea of London taking independence and joining the EU, just so long as I'm on the right side of the dividing line.
Well, you say that, one of Sadiq Khan's ideas he's been mooting is that not only will drivers have to pay the congestion charge if they come into certain parts of central London, but they'd have to pay some sort of charge to come into Greater London at all.
There is no end to the pain and grief in ordinary people's lives that mayor wants to cause. Unfortunately, it does appear the people of London seem to want it. And democracy is the right system. Unfortunately, Sadiq Khan doesn't actually believe in democracy, as we've discovered over the past few years. But yeah, a terrible idea. And as many of you, will know, if you are in outer London, that boundary is slightly fuzzy. I'm one side of the boundary in Colston. Chipstead, the other side of the boundary, isn't really a separate town. It's a continuation. And for the people that live in both areas, you switch between them, and to pay a fee each time you do that would be completely outrageous.
Moving on to the constituency. So this is the traditional first past the post way of electing members of the Greater London Assembly. Worth mentioning, I think, that Reform UK have got candidates in all of those constituencies. Again, Reclaim, no candidates whatsoever. All this information is available, as I say, on the London Elects website, but it's only fair that we concentrate, I think, on the Croydon and Sutton constituency, as it's our constituency. Mike, what have you made of the candidates that have been put up for the Croydon and Sutton constituency?
It's interesting that two of them were in the South Norwood by-election, made famous for me being in it as well. Maybe only made famous to me. But Claire Bonham, who's a Liberal Democrat, she's done a lot of work in that sort of Crystal Palace, Upper Norwood area of the borough. And I think it's probably done a lot of good work. The Lib Dems aren't my cup of tea, but fair dues. She's done, I think she's sort of built a following up there, and not surprising they've put her up as their candidate in this area. Patsy Cummings, who won the South Norwood by-election, Councillor Patsy Cummings, who is a thing in the Labour Party, and I can't remember what sort of, but a bit of a splash in the Labour Party. Blocked me on Twitter before I'd even ever heard of her. But she will no doubt do pretty well, as is often the case. Neil Garrett, a councillor in Sutton, again, he seemed very receptive to working with people. I know some people have tried to make contact with him on various things, and he's been doing that. Robert Pole, we've interviewed. Robert Pole's the man behind Save Our Statues campaign, or one of the men behind it. So really interesting, really sort of an active campaigner there. No idea who Let London Live On. And Peter Underwood for the Green Party, but the less said about him, the better. What we do know about the constituencies, of course, it was won by Steve O'Connor, Steve O'Connell, his current GLA member and a councillor in Henley, a Brexiteer, a Palace fan, but it wasn't a massive win. So, and I was looking at the results earlier, and that was a time that a certain Peter Staveley that we know won 10% of the vote for UKIP. So you do wonder if that, in fact, the difference was 38% to the Conservatives and 32% to Labour, and this was in 2016. Now, I think certainly Croydon's become more Labour in that time, despite some of the things that have gone on in the borough. 10% vote to Peter. You do wonder what might happen there, and if indeed that where that vote will break, and whether the borough might switch.
And of course, Sutton has a Lib Dem council.
It does. Now, interestingly, they only got 10% of the vote in the 2016 election. So the Lib Dem council has been slowly losing popularity in Sutton, and it's becoming more conservative. But it's still in place. They've now lost both of the parliamentary seats there. But there's not. I don't know why in the last assembly elections they didn't really get many votes. Maybe they weren't putting the effort in you would expect. Not really sure. What was interesting last time as well, the Greens got 7.4% of the vote in there. That seems a high number. I wouldn't have thought they'd achieve quite that level again. So there does seem some votes up for grabs by both parties, and who knows? You can't get a sense because, of course, no one's campaigning on the ground. But if the Reform UK come in and they grab that 10% from UKIP, I would think they won't grab all that. Yeah, this could be quite a tight run thing.
We will watch the campaign with interest over the next few weeks.
Is it worth, Dan, just talking about, and I won't pretend to fully understand how this works, but how these constituencies and London-wide elections work together. So, in essence, you get a couple of votes, one at your constituencies level, one at the London-wide level, and if parties whose constituency votes don't get the representation at the constituency level, which is in essence every party other than Conservatives and Labour has been in the past. All of those other parties, those votes kind of go into a top-up system whereby they're more likely to get a London-wide member elected. So at the moment, and Dan, I know you mentioned it earlier, Peter Whittle, David Curtin are Assembly members elected under UKIP. They've both subsequently left, but that was on a London-wide basis. There's also a Lib Dem Greens elected on the same basis. So whilst at a local level, there's you may want to vote for a particular party. Actually, vote for who you want, but if your party doesn't win, that may help top up a London-wide system, and it's that London, and that's the opportunity for some of the smaller parties to get people elected to the GLA.
Absolutely, yes, that is basically how it works. So the list system is the best route for smaller parties to get elected, because it is more a proportional basis across all of London. So it'll be interesting to see whether any of the lesser known parties, shall we say, actually get any representation out of this election in May. Well, you think you've got enough elections there to talk about, Mural and GLA elections. We've got quite a lot coming up in Croydon. somewhat unexpectedly. We were all thinking this year in Croydon would be about the Democ referendum, which is scheduled for October, but no. In May, on the same day as the GLA elections, we have a plethora of council by-elections now. Tony Newman and Simon Hall, the councillors who were, I think it was the terms, administratively suspended from the Labour Party due to what had gone on with the running of Croydon Council, and of course its bankruptcy. They have now both resigned as councillors from the Woodside ward and New Addington North ward, respectively. But there's a third Labour councillor who's also decided to step down. Jane Avis, who's a cabinet member for Homes and Gateway Services, has resigned from the council for family reasons. She was the councillor in South Norwood, the centre of all elections. So there's going to be 3 currently Labour-held seats that are up for grabs on that day. But also, hot on the heels of that, 2 Conservatives have decided to step down from the council. Vidi Mohan, the councillor for Park Hill and Whitgift, who was previously the councillor for where I live, in Fairfield. He's decided to step down. I think he's got quite a lot on with his business at the moment. And Steve O'Connell, who you mentioned, Mike, earlier, was the GLA member for Croydon and Sutton, and a councillor in Croydon for Kenley. He's decided to effectively retire from public life. I think he was obviously looking to do that from the GLA last year before the elections were postponed. So a heck of a lot of elections taking place in Croydon, or at least in certain parts of Croydon. How do you think these will go, Mike, given the current situation with Croydon Council?
Sadly, I suspect there will be no change, and it should reflect that this council has been a disaster for some time. Obviously, Tony Newman's left, and when I was involved in Democ, he took some point of having a go, or using me as a face of Democ to have a go at. Never man enough to have a go at me directly, of course. And I take no pleasure in the fact that he's no longer a councillor and he's lost his job. I take no pleasure in that at all. But he's bankrupted our council. Lots of people can lose this job because of his administration, lose their jobs because of his administration. So, and that should be reflected. But I looked at the results from the 2018 elections across these wards, and the lowest performing Labour councillor and the top performing Conservative councillor in South Norwood, the difference was 1,700 votes. So Labour was on 2,338 and the Conservatives on 5,993. So even if the Labour vote collapses, they're still likely to get elected there. Woodside, very similar. The difference is 1,600 votes, so 2,500 to 800 odd. New Addington North, where you'd think the Conservatives might have more of a chance, a Brexit voting area, the kind of working class area that has been trending Conservative. In 2018, the difference was 700 votes from Labour on 1,100-ish, and the Conservatives on 400. You look at the Conservatives, Kenley's a foregone Conservative seat, so 1,300 vote lead by the Conservatives. Park Hill and Whitgift is slightly more interesting, I think. Anyone that knows Croydon and been involved in politics will know that Vidi has had a very big personal vote. He's a very popular man, happens to work in the IT industry, and there's an awful lot of, I think some of that area was Emphasis used to house people. So I know people, lots of people have randomly said to me over the years, because they know I'm a bit involved in politics, do I know Vidi? And I don't. It so happens I don't think we've ever met, but he's got a large personal vote in that area. So it's a 400 vote lead for the Conservatives. But weirdly, even after all the things that have been happening in the council, that's the one seat that looks like it could potentially switch. Now, I'm not saying it will, but it's not a massive lead by the Conservatives. I think that area has become more Labour. And whilst I don't know who Labour will run, and I don't think they'll run the same person they did last time, and that was Ranald Piera, who I do know, through Democ, and he's a local man to the area, a very decent man, and I could imagine he probably also had a reasonable personal vote. I think he might be persona non grata for Labour nowadays, and I'm not sure he'll run again there, but we shall see. But that's, you know, for all the things that are wrong with this council, if anything was to happen differently, it might be that Labour win that. I don't know what your thoughts are, Dan.
Well, of course, these elections are taking place on the same day as the Mural election. So, what effect that will have on getting out the vote will be interesting. It may have been a different scenario if these by-elections were taking place either by themselves or even, you know, all of them on the same day, but just on a different day to the Mural elections, and the focus that gets put on that by the major parties, and you know, in getting them out to vote on one thing, you may get them out to vote on another. So I'm not so sure that the turnout in some places would be as high for a council by-election as it might be with them being held on the same day as the Mural elections. So yeah, I think probably Park Hill is the one to look out for. But yes, you would imagine that Labour should take a bit of a shellacking in Croydon, but we'll just have to wait and see. Well, the nominations for those by-elections have now opened, but they will close next week. So we will report on those when we know who's actually been nominated as the candidates for those wards.
Just one thing, looking through the results in Croydon, something I hadn't quite realised how much this was the case. Every ward in Croydon in 2018 basically had a group of Conservatives and then a group of Labour Party candidates, first and second place, whatever way round that might be, Labour, Conservative, Conservative, Labour. The one notable exception there are three exceptions. The notable one is, of course, Addiscombe East, where Jeet Baines and the current mayor were elected, and that's one Labour, one Conservative. And the other two exceptions were Old Causden, where the Lib Dems were second, so two Lib Dems after two Conservatives, and Crystal Palace in Upper Norwood, where it was Labour, then Claire Bonham for the Lib Dems, then some Conservatives, then another Lib Dem. I think that was the order. But again, there was a Lib Dem second. So a testament to the fact that Claire done a lot of work to move her name forward in the area. But it's just interesting, and whatever happens in these local elections, and it will be nice to see some smaller parties and some other parties kind of try and break into the council in Croydon. God knows we need some change there, but it's not being reflected by the voters, and there really isn't much breakthrough seen by them.
So, Mike, as you said, we've been a few weeks since the last podcast, but there's been plenty going on our website. Why don't you take the listeners through those articles?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a couple of articles from people that are running in local elections, locally and slightly further afield. Firstly, Robert Pole, as mentioned, the Reform Party candidate for the GLA for Croydon and Sutton. We've got an article from him. He talks about his Save Our Statues campaign. And just a quote here: like many, it took a trigger moment to make me actually stand up and do something. For me, it was the attack on our heritage last summer. There were very few voices in politics speaking against it, and I want to change that. So, interesting read about Robert, a chance to find out about someone running locally, and give that a read. Also, we've had an article from an interview with the new London and South East coordinator, Marco Di Paolo, of the UK Libertarian Party. Marco talks a bit about how he got involved in politics, what his interests are. He's running for election both at a county level and a town level in Worthing, where he lives. He sums up the mayoral race quite well for London, really. I think it's unfortunate that the current mayor is likely to be re-elected based on which party he represents rather than his ability to do the job. From an outside perspective, all I see is virtuous posturing but little action of relevancy, and I think he's hit the nail on the head rather well there. Then move on to a couple of articles written by Josh Ashcroft, who writes for us quite regularly. Josh has written a a micro lens perspective of equilibrium and disequilibrium, looking at a couple of economist views of entrepreneurship. Very detailed article on economics there, and well worth a read if you want to understand that more. He's also written about the slowing recovery to recover faster, the Chancellor's plan or tax plan out of the last budget. An interesting review of the last budget. I think some of the really strong points he makes here about, really what we saw was a lot of tax rises that are not going to help us recover from this god-awful lockdown recession. Makes a point here. Most jobs paying these rates, and this is talking about a minimum wage, are part-time or sales assistant retail work. Therefore, it will have a negative financial effects on these demographics, such as single parents looking to work part-time and students. Further, this will cause a hit to high street businesses struggling to find employees. If you make something more expensive, like labour, like working, you get less jobs, and that's a really negative point, and well worth a read of that. Next article, and if I do say so myself, a little celebration of a school in Croydon, Winterbourne Nursery and Infant School, where I'm a vice chair of governors. Written up what they've been doing during lockdown, and that's now been put online by the Croydon Advertiser, and indeed printed in this week's Croydon Advertiser. That being the week of Good Friday as we speak. So just a quote here, not from my article so much as from Ofsted, and talking about how the school's been inspected recently. Teachers provide a warm, nurturing start to each day with a live online session. They give clear guidance and support pupils and parents through their day's learning tasks. Now, of course, schools are now back, but yes, there was a long time there where we weren't. And yeah, if you're interested in things locally, worth having a read of, if I do say so myself. Also, I've been interviewed by Sputnik Radio talking about the COVID vaccine. We talked about vaccine passports earlier, but the vaccine does appear to be saving lives, and it's surely you would want countries would want to do that. We're talking about the failure of the EU to get the vaccine out in their country. A quote there from myself: "It isn't that they won't achieve the goal. In the end, it isn't that their people won't get vaccinated, but the slowness of that vaccine is just a window and opportunity for the virus to kill more people." So you can have a listen to me there and a read of myself on Sputnik Radio. I hate to say it's a lot by me, but we are locked down. I wrote again for the Taxpayers Alliance about Croydon Council. And Dan, we've been talking a lot about Croydon Council recently. There's an update to my article from October about what we now found out with the council. We've now had the audit. We've had a change of leadership. But really just looking at the fact that it's not clear that things have changed, but it is just how bad the council was before. Just talking a bit about councillors' finances, Croydon councillors voted to reduce £300,000 from councillor pay from April 2021. That's just gone into effect. Better late than never, but this will still likely leave Croydon's councillors in the top 20% best remunerated in the country and the top 6 in London. Is that really fitting for cabinet members who oversaw only the second bankruptcy this century? That is what we've got here. They're still being well rewarded for failure, and that shouldn't be allowed. Lastly, there's a couple of articles from Peter Kirby, and these are well worth read if you're interested in global warming and some of what we're told, and perhaps gives a bit of a challenge to them. So there's a couple of articles. First one was a short piece, just looking at climate change and a brief review and some facts, as he's titled it. Quick quote here: "Those seeking to stop the changes are trying to stop the unstoppable, and the policies which have been introduced to achieve this are very harmful to the economy, and the scary forecasts based on computer models are exaggerated." So yeah, Peter, a short article on that. If you're interested, have a quick read. If you're after something more in depth, Peter's written a much more detailed article, and that really is interesting. Lots of charts, lots of facts about climate change, and challenge perhaps some of the narratives we hear. So a second article about carbon dioxide and global warming, worth a read of. Points out here, Professor Chris Holland of the Hadley Centre for Climate Prediction and Research said, "The data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data,
We're basing them on the climate models. Such quotes are never mentioned in the news media. And that is sadly the case. One more quote from that, and I think there's lots of things in here. From 1885 to 1916, the temperature was falling slightly. From 1916 to 1940, it was rising slightly. From 1940 to 1975, it was falling slightly. From 1975 to 1998, rising slightly. From 1988 to 2020, there has been no statistically significant change. Weather changes, and it's not necessarily because of man-made reasons. Well worth a read, well worth arming yourself with some facts on climate change there.
Well, if you'd like to write for our website, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter at Croydon Const, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalist@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the pubcast. We will do a pubcast when we're allowed anywhere near a pub. And do please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, hopefully we'll be in a pub soon enough, or at least outside a pub, and we'll be able to do a pubcast and able to meet up with some mates. So that'll be good. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay safe, everybody.